All right, welcome back to another episode of the Black Bullion Show. Mitch McConnell says he favors letting states declare bankruptcy. Now, this is big, and it may be bigger in ways that you may not see until the very end of this episode. So definitely stay tuned to the end. But before we get into everything, please like the video. Please subscribe to the channel if you're new. Please share the video to get this economic evangelism out there because I really am pointing at articles like this to talk about how we can preserve our wealth. And this is for anyone. I don't care what side of the political aisle you're on. This is something that is important for everyone to key in on. So, why is this important and why is this big news? So, I have some notes here and I'm going to get into it. So, recently, Senator McConnell was on a radio station with Hugh Hewitt. He's a radio host. Uh, Senator McConnell was asked about state solvency during this crisis. And this is what he said. He said, I would certainly be in favor of allowing states to use the bankruptcy route. It saves some cities, and there's no good reason for it to not be available. My guess is their first choice, being states, would be for the federal government to borrow money from future generations to send it down to them now so they don't have to do that, meaning going through bankruptcy. That's something I'm not, or I'm not going to be in favor of. Now, what he's essentially saying is that we are already taxing future generations up to the eyeballs, and in no good conscience, or he feels like he couldn't continue to do so in good conscience, knowing the types of burdens that some of these states have, and we'll get into that in the later part of this video. But full disclaimer, just to essentially burst Mitch McConnell's bubble here, the president has said that there will be state aid in the next stimulus package. So in immediate terms, bankruptcy options are not being considered at the moment. However, it is being talked about, and that's something that should raise some red flags. So what does that mean for you? Well, the new unemployment numbers are out. And wouldn't you know it, jobless claims have jumped another 4.4 million. So now we're at 26 million Americans who have lost their jobs due to this issue right now. So what does that mean? That means out of the 157 million US workforce, 16.56% have filed for unemployment. 16.56% of the entire US workforce has filed for unemployment basically within the last month and a half, or the last few weeks, really. So when all these people file for unemployment, what does that mean for states? Well, that means they're not receiving consistent tax revenues. And some states can weather that, and some others with larger liabilities may not be able to weather that. And you may ask, well, why wouldn't they be able to weather those situations? Well, that's because of something called public employee pensions. Now, pensions may be something that you've probably heard about being talked about over the maybe the past 10 years or so, about how states are having a hard time paying their pension liabilities or their pension obligations. And you may have even heard of books such as Who Stole My Pension by Robert Kiyosaki. I read a couple of pages from the sample book off of the iTunes store, so I'm looking to actually buy that. He wrote that with someone else, and the other person has a really good wealth of knowledge when it comes to pensions. So it's not just Robert Kiyosaki talking about this, but I believe there's someone else in there talking about it. So I'm really curious to see what information is in that book. This isn't sponsored by them, though, by the way. So just a side note. Um, so a lot of states have these pension obligations that they have to pay to their public employees. Now, this is something that I'm actually pretty, or that I've come across in my experience, having been a employee to a state government. And I was this during my college years. During my college years, I was actually doing landscaping for the college that I was working for, and the department that I was working in, well, the whole school really was a public school, in a college sense, and everyone who worked there received their paycheck from the state government, including those who worked in landscaping. So when I was doing my landscaping work, I was getting a paycheck essentially from the state government. But I was a student there, kind of doing like a work study thing, and I was doing that for about 4 or 5 years. My supervisor during that time, um, he himself was banking on the pension. He kept telling me over and over again, like, man, you know, I'm considering retiring in the next few years. I just have to make sure some of these loose ends are tied up. He himself had gone through actually a couple of bankruptcies himself personally, and he had a hard time, generally with taking care of the aftermath of that. And at the time, he was looking to buy a home. That was his dream. His dream was to buy a home, and his dream was to retire early, based off of the pension plan that he had. Maybe 2 or 3 years into it, another guy signed up. He was a younger guy, and this guy, he wasn't in the work study program. He, was just going to be a regular employee like everybody else, like my supervisor. And this guy basically signed up, and my supervisor pulled me aside and said, you know what? This guy, he's not going to get a similar pension plan like I have. The pension plans that myself and maybe one other guy here has was ended in the early 80s. Basically, a couple of years after he signed up to work at as a landscaper for this department, they cut this pension program, and they reduced the pension obligations essentially to the employees in the following pension program. So that's why he felt confident that, okay, I can retire early because I'll have X amount of income coming here. And I think he also wanted to start his own landscaping business. Actually, he did. So he was also doing that on the side too. So he thought, okay, I'm getting money here, and then I can get money from my own landscaping business, and everything should be good, right? Well, here are some potential issues that states are running into. My supervisor was essentially Gen X. He was young in the early to mid 80s. Now imagine guys like my Gen X supervisor plus all of the baby boomer generation, one of the largest generations, who has a public employee pension, who are soon getting ready to retire, if not having retired already. And that's what has states worried. So here's the reason why bankruptcy would be an issue and would have states worried. So, given insolvency, this is what happens during a bankruptcy. Number one, assets are marshaled for distribution. Two, um, they set priorities for various classes of creditors. And three, they offer a discharge for the bankrupt party for most of their obligations. Now, secured creditors are taken care of first, and then the unsecured creditors. However, in cases like GM and Chrysler during the Great Recession, uh, there was federal intervention from the executive branch, and it made it so that the union pension claims pushed the secured creditors to the side effectively. So, in my opinion, I see three scenarios playing out for pensions, and I think one is more likely than the others. So, here are the three scenarios I see playing out for pensions. One, payments will continue and we will borrow into future generations with the help of the federal government. That's essentially like what, that's not a surprise. That's what likely would happen in any sense. Number two is a little bit more startling than that. Number two would be pension obligations will be reduced. Some have said they need to be reduced to private pension levels. And number three is even more startling than that. Pension obligations will be eliminated. Now, I don't think the third would happen. I even don't think the second would happen. The reason why is because if those two things were to happen, and we have the largest generation having their obligations reduced, their essential retirement cut in half or just eliminated, there would be social disorder like we have never seen in this country. So I don't think that would happen. I think the safest thing that these politicians will do for themselves, say for themselves, not for any of us, is they will kick the can down the road and let future generations take care of this long after they've died. So they won't get the brunt of this. Future generations will just have to wring their fists at the tombstones of these politicians. So here, I'm now going to transition to some states, to the top 50 states, or to the 50 states ranked in their ability to pay back their pensions, how well they're funded. So this goes from best to worst, essentially. So Wisconsin is, the best. Their funded ratio is 102.6%. Next is South Dakota. Then we have Tennessee. Then we have New York. Then Idaho, North Carolina, Utah, Nebraska, Washington State, Oregon, Delaware, Iowa, Maine, Ohio, Florida, Georgia. Oh, page is unresponsive. So actually, let's just cut that loose. But essentially, we have states that don't have the ability to pay off these obligations well. So let me know what you think are the likely scenarios that will come from this. I bring these options up essentially so that you can do your own research and then come up with your own conclusions. So let me know in the comment section below, what do you think will happen to pension obligations? Do you think the first will happen? Payments will just continue as usual, and we'll borrow into the future. We will continue to essentially pay people what we told them we'll pay them, yet their purchasing power will continue to decrease. So essentially, they're still stealing your pension. Two, pension obligations will be trimmed, and then again, your purchasing power will be reduced. So even a harsher slap, or three, even harsher pension obligations will be completely eliminated, and whatever money you have in other accounts will be reduced. That, I think, won't happen. I don't think number two will happen, but I do think number one is likely to happen. Payments will continue. I don't think that states will effectively go into bankruptcy, but this is just something to consider. And also, this is just my opinion. I want you to do your own research because you may find something that I haven't found. And if you do, please put in the comment section below for all of us to see, so that we can see, well, this is something we haven't taken into consideration. maybe there could be a possibility of states going into bankruptcy. But until then, thanks again for watching this video. Please give it a like. Please subscribe to the channel if you're new. And as always, it's Black Bullion.